Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, we journey back through the mists of time to explore the fascinating story of the Suebi, one of ancient Germania's most influential tribal confederations. Settle into comfort, close your eyes, and let this tale of warriors, migrations, and kingdoms carry you gently into peaceful slumber. In the dense forests and rolling plains of ancient Germania, long before nations bore the names we know today, there lived a people whose identity would shape European history for centuries. The Suebi were not merely a single tribe, but rather a vast confederation of Germanic peoples united by culture, language, and shared traditions. Their name itself derived from ancient roots, suggested movement and wandering, a fitting designation for those who would traverse vast distances across the European continent. Earliest mentions of these people come from classical writers who observed them with a mixture of fascination and trepidation. They inhabited territories stretching across what we now call central Germany, their lands encompassing regions near the Elbe River, and extending into areas that would later become associated with numerous Germanic tribal groups. These were people of the forest and field, living in harmony with landscapes that seemed impenetrable to outsiders, yet provided everything needed for their survival. Their society organized itself around kinship bonds and warrior culture. Families formed the basic unit, extending into clans that maintained fierce loyalty to one another. Leadership emerged through demonstrations of courage, wisdom, and success in both battle and peacetime governance. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of Rome, Suebian society maintained a certain fluidity, where merit could elevate individuals beyond their birth circumstances. Though noble lineages certainly carried weight and prestige, the Suebi dressed distinctively, with warriors favoring the Suebian knot, a hairstyle where hair was pulled to the side of the head and tied, creating a striking appearance that set them apart from other Germanic peoples. This wasn't merely fashion but identity, a visible marker of belonging to this great confederation. Their clothing utilized wool and leather, practical garments suited to the northern climate, often adorned with brooches and decorative elements that indicated status and achievement. The Suebi first entered the consciousness of Mediterranean civilization through their interactions with expanding Roman power. In the late 2nd century BCE, Germanic movements brought various tribes into collision courses with Roman interests. The Suebi, under various leaders, participated in these tumultuous times, sometimes as allies, often as adversaries to Roman expansion. Julius Caesar's commentaries provide our most detailed early accounts of these people. During his campaigns in Gaul, Caesar encountered Suebian groups and recorded his observations with the careful eye of both military commander and ethnographer. He described them as formidable warriors, living simply but fighting fiercely, organized in ways that confounded Roman tactical expectations. Their mobility particularly impressed and frustrated Roman generals accustomed to enemies who built permanent fortifications. One Suebian leader particularly captured Roman attention: Ariovistus. This king had led his people across the Rhine into Gallic territories, establishing dominance over local tribes and creating what Romans perceived as a dangerous power that threatened their interests. Caesar's conflict with Ariovistus in 58 BCE became a defining moment in Suebian history. The Roman general maneuvered diplomatically and militarily, ultimately forcing a confrontation where Roman discipline overcame Suebian ferocity. The defeat pushed many Suebi back across the Rhine, but they were far from vanquished. The river became a fluctuating boundary, sometimes barrier, sometimes bridge, as Suebian groups maintained presence and influence on both sides. Roman frontier defenses gradually solidified, creating the Limes, a border zone where Roman and Germanic worlds met, traded, and occasionally clashed. Beyond the reach of Roman power, Suebian life continued according to ancient patterns. Their settlements nestled within clearings carved from endless forests, surrounded by fields where they cultivated barley, wheat, and other crops. Agriculture provided sustenance, but the Suebi never abandoned their pastoral traditions. maintaining herds of cattle, sheep, and horses that represented wealth and status. Hunting remained important, not merely for food, but as training for warfare and demonstration of courage. Young men proved themselves by tracking dangerous game through dark woods, learning skills that would serve them when conflicts arose. The forests themselves held spiritual significance, sacred groves where rituals honored gods and ancestors, places where the veil between worlds seemed thin. Their religious practices centered on natural phenomena and warrior deities. While our knowledge remains fragmentary, classical sources mention their reverence for gods associated with war, fertility, and the sky. Priests and priestesses maintained traditions, interpreting omens, conducting sacrifices, and preserving oral histories that connected each generation to those before. Women in Suebian society held positions of respect, managing households, participating in religious ceremonies, and sometimes wielding significant influence in community decisions. While warfare remained primarily male domain, women's roles in maintaining social fabric, passing down traditions, and ensuring community survival earned them honored status. Marriage alliances between powerful families shaped political landscapes, with women serving as crucial links binding different groups together. As centuries progressed, pressures mounted across Germania. Population growth, climate fluctuations, and competitions for resources created instability. Various Suebian groups found themselves pushed or pulled in different directions, beginning movements that would eventually reshape European demographics entirely. Some Suebian peoples moved eastward, establishing themselves in territories that would later be associated with various Slavic and Germanic kingdoms. Others pressed westward and southward, testing Roman boundaries, seeking new lands, driven by circumstances we can now only partially reconstruct. These weren't coordinated invasions, but rather complex patterns of migration where entire communities, families, and warriors together sought new homes. The Marcomanni and Quadi, tribes considered part of the greater Suebian confederation, established themselves in regions corresponding to modern Bohemia and Moravia. Under leaders like Maroboduus, they created powerful kingdoms that rivaled Roman provinces in organization and strength. These groups maintained Suebian identity while adapting to new circumstances, building upon foundations laid by ancestors, yet creating something distinctive. Warfare with Rome intensified during the Marcomannic Wars of the 160s and 170s CE. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius spent years campaigning against these peoples, struggles immortalized in historical records and artistic monuments. The conflicts revealed both Suebian military capabilities and Roman determination to maintain frontier integrity. Neither side achieved complete victory. Instead, uneasy accommodations emerged, with some Suebian groups settling within imperial borders as federati, allied peoples providing military service in exchange for land and protection. Contact with Rome brought changes to Suebian society. Trade increased despite conflicts, with Germanic amber, furs, and slaves exchanged for Roman-manufactured goods, wine, and precious metals. Some Suebi learned Latin, adopted Roman customs, or served in Roman armies, experiences that transformed their worldviews. Yet core identity persisted, Suebian traditions adapting rather than disappearing. Christianity began reaching Germanic peoples during late antiquity. Initially, most Suebi maintained traditional beliefs, but over time, Christian ideas penetrated their communities. This religious transformation occurred gradually, with traditional and Christian practices sometimes coexisting, sometimes conflicting, as missionaries ventured beyond imperial boundaries and converted populations adopted new faiths while retaining certain ancestral customs. The political landscape of late Roman Europe created opportunities for ambitious Suebian leaders. As imperial authority weakened in western provinces, various Germanic groups established successor kingdoms. The Suebi, who had migrated into Iberia, modern Spain and Portugal, carved out their own realm in the northwestern regions, creating a kingdom that would endure for over a century and a half. This Iberian Suebian kingdom deserves particular attention, representing a remarkable chapter in their long history. Arriving in the early 5th century amid the chaos of collapsing Roman authority, Suebian groups under various leaders established control over Gallaecia, the northwestern corner of the Iberian Peninsula. Here, far from their ancestral Germanic homelands, they created a functional kingdom that navigated complex relationships with other barbarian groups, remaining Roman populations, and the distant but symbolically important imperial government. The Suebian kings of Gallaecia faced unique challenges. They ruled over mixed populations, with Roman provincials far outnumbering Germanic settlers. Success required accommodation and adaptation. The Suebi gradually adopted Latin for administration, converted to Christianity, and incorporated Roman legal and governmental traditions while maintaining their martial identity and leadership structures. King Rechiar, ruling in the mid-5th century, exemplified this hybrid culture. He was reportedly the first Germanic king to officially convert to Catholicism, rather than the Arian Christianity many Germanic peoples initially adopted. This decision had profound implications, easing relations with the Roman-descended population and Catholic clergy, while potentially creating tensions with Arian Visigothic neighbors who would ultimately conquer the Suebian kingdom. The Suebian realm experienced periods of strength and weakness, expanding and contracting based on leadership quality and external pressures. They controlled important cities, maintained armies, collected taxes, and functioned as a legitimate successor state to Roman provincial government. Archaeological evidence reveals continued Germanic cultural elements alongside Roman traditions, a blending of worlds in daily life, burial practices, and material culture. Throughout their existence, the Suebi maintained distinctive cultural traits that set them apart, even as they integrated with other peoples. Language remained a crucial identity marker. They spoke Germanic dialects related to other tribal languages but with unique features. Over time, especially in places like Gallaecia, their language gradually gave way to Latin-derived Romance languages. Though some Germanic vocabulary entered local dialects, subtle linguistic footprints of their presence, their legal traditions emphasized compensation and reconciliation for wrongs, rather than exclusively punitive justice. Vergild systems assigned monetary values to lives and injuries, allowing conflicts to be resolved through payments rather than endless blood feuds. These traditions influenced European legal development as Germanic customary law merged with Roman legal concepts. Artistic expression manifested in metalwork, jewelry, and decorated weapons. Suebian craftsmen created beautiful fibulae, brooches that fastened clothing, often decorated with geometric patterns, animal motifs, or abstract designs. These objects served practical purposes while displaying wealth and taste. Grave goods from Suebian burials reveal their values, with weapons for warriors, jewelry for women, and sometimes offerings suggesting beliefs about afterlife needs. Their agricultural practices and land management techniques shaped landscapes where they settled. Forest clearance, field systems, and settlement patterns established by Suebian communities influenced regional development for centuries after their political structures disappeared. In some areas, village names and geographical features preserve linguistic echoes of Suebian presence. The Suebian story involves complex relationships with numerous other peoples. Fellow Germanic tribes were sometimes allies, sometimes rivals. The Alemanni, Vandals, Goths, and other groups shared cultural roots with the Suebi, yet pursued separate destinies. Alliances formed and dissolved based on immediate circumstances, rather than permanent ethnic solidarity. Interactions with Hunnic peoples during the 4th and 5th centuries proved particularly consequential. The Huns' westward expansion displaced numerous groups, creating domino effects that contributed to the migration period's chaos. Some Suebian groups found themselves under Hunnic dominance, paying tribute and providing warriors for Hunnic campaigns. Others managed to maintain independence, relocating to avoid subjugation. The Visigothic kingdom that dominated much of Iberia viewed the Suebian realm with a mixture of tolerance and ambition. For decades, the two kingdoms coexisted uneasily, sometimes cooperating against common threats, sometimes competing for territory and influence. Religious differences with Catholic Suebi and Arian Visigoths added another dimension to their relationship. Eventually, in the late 6th century, the Visigothic king Leovigild conquered the Suebian kingdom, ending its independent existence. This wasn't complete annihilation but rather absorption. The Suebi became subjects of a larger state, their distinctive identity gradually blurring as generations passed, intermarriage increased, and cultural assimilation progressed. Understanding the end of distinctive Suebian identity requires recognizing that ancient ethnic identities were more fluid than modern concepts suggest. The Suebi didn't disappear suddenly, but rather transformed over generations. In Iberia, descendants of Suebian settlers became indistinguishable from the broader population, contributing to the ethnic mix that would eventually produce medieval and modern Spanish and Portuguese peoples. In their original Central European homelands, other tribal names and political organizations gradually replaced specifically Suebian identity. The Alemanni, who inhabited regions once associated with Suebian groups, may have included Suebian elements. The Bavarians who settled in southern Germanic territories likely incorporated Suebian populations. Modern Swabia, a region in southwestern Germany, preserves the Suebian name. Though the connection to ancient peoples remains complex and debated, linguistic traces persisted longer than political structures. Suebian dialects contributed to the development of High German and other Germanic language branches. Scholars studying historical linguistics can sometimes identify features potentially traceable to Suebian speech patterns, though certainty becomes difficult across such temporal distances. Medieval writers occasionally mentioned the Suebi, but often with confusion about whether they referred to ancient peoples or contemporary populations. The name carried prestige, a connection to formidable ancestors, so various groups claimed Suebian heritage. Separating historical continuity from legendary association challenges, modern researchers attempting to trace clear lineages. Modern archaeology provides crucial insights into Suebian life beyond what classical texts reveal. Excavations of settlement sites show how they organized living spaces, what they ate, how they built structures, and what tools they used. Post-hole patterns indicate building construction. Refuse pits contain dietary remains, and hearth locations reveal household organization. Cemetery excavations prove particularly informative. Burial practices reflected beliefs about death and afterlife. Warriors interred with weapons, shields, and sometimes horses represented continuing martial identity, even in death. Women buried with jewelry, textile tools, and domestic items showed their valued roles. Differences in grave goods suggest social stratification, with some burials demonstrating considerable wealth while others remained modest. Skeletal analysis reveals health conditions, diet, and sometimes causes of death. Healed fractures testified of violent lives, but also successful medical treatment. Dental wear patterns indicate food types. Heights and robust bone structures suggest generally adequate nutrition despite periodic hardships. Evidence of injuries consistent with combat appears frequently, reminding us these were people for whom violence remained a constant possibility. Metal detector finds and systematic field surveys continue revealing artifacts across formerly Suebian territories. Coins, both Roman and locally produced, show economic connections. Pottery styles demonstrate cultural preferences and trade networks. Glass beads, bronze fittings, and iron tools accumulate into data sets, allowing archaeologists to map settlement patterns and trace cultural changes over time. Recent genetic studies add another dimension to understanding ancient populations. Analysis of DNA extracted from skeletal remains in Suebian-associated cemeteries reveals biological relationships and migration patterns. These studies show that ancient Germanic populations had diverse origins, with contributions from various ancestral groups that mixed over millennia. Modern populations in regions historically associated with the Suebi carry genetic markers traceable to ancient times, though disentangling specific tribal contributions from the broader Germanic and European genetic heritage remains challenging. Everyone living in Central and Western Europe today likely has numerous ancestors who lived during the migration period, potentially including Suebian individuals, though specific genealogical connections disappear into the mists of time. These genetic studies also reveal that ancient identities were more about culture than pure biological descent. Groups we know by specific tribal names included people of varied ancestral backgrounds, united by shared language, customs, and political allegiances. The Suebian confederation likely always included peoples of different origins who adopted Suebian identity rather than representing a single, isolated bloodline. The religious journey of Suebian peoples reflects broader European spiritual transformations. Their ancient paganism, rooted in nature worship and warrior gods, gradually gave way to Christianity, though this transition occurred over centuries and through complex processes. Early contacts with Christian Romans introduced new ideas, but conversion required more than simple exposure. Missionaries who ventured into Germanic territories faced dangerous work. Some became martyrs, others achieved remarkable success, and many fell somewhere between. They needed to communicate Christian concepts in ways that resonated with Germanic worldviews, sometimes adapting messages to local contexts, sometimes maintaining strict doctrinal positions. For Suebian communities, conversion often occurred gradually. Leaders might convert for political reasons, seeing advantages in aligning with Christian kingdoms or the prestige of Roman civilization. Common people might maintain traditional practices longer, creating periods of dual belief systems where Christian rites overlaid persistent pagan customs. Eventually, as Christianity became normative, older traditions survived only as folk customs stripped of overt religious meaning or disappeared entirely. Churches built in formerly Suebian territories became centers of new communities. Monasteries preserved learning, provided social services, and served as bases for further missionary efforts. The landscape itself transformed, with Christian sacred sites replacing pagan groves, crosses marking intersections and boundaries, and church bells calling communities to worship according to new rhythms. Suebian economy relied primarily on agriculture and animal husbandry. They grew various grains depending on climate and soil conditions, primarily barley and wheat, along with vegetables and legumes in household gardens. Flax cultivation provided fibers for linen cloth, while sheep wool supplied material for warmer garments. These activities followed seasonal rhythms, planting and harvest times dictating annual patterns. Livestock represented wealth and sustenance. Cattle provided meat, milk, leather, and draft power for plowing. Pigs thrived in forested environments, converting acorns and forage into pork. Horses served transportation, military, and prestige functions, with fine horses being valuable possessions marking elite status. Successful management of flocks and herds required knowledge passed down generations. Craft specialization existed within communities. Blacksmiths worked iron into tools, weapons, and decorative objects, their skills highly valued and sometimes regarded with a touch of magic. Potters created vessels for storage, cooking, and serving. Weavers transformed raw fibers into cloth. Leather workers produced shoes, belts, and various goods. These specialists might work part-time, combining craft production with agricultural activities. Trade networks connected Suebian territories with distant regions. Amber from northern coasts traveled south through Germanic hands toward Mediterranean markets. Roman goods flowed north, including wine, manufactured pottery, and metalwork. Slaves, unfortunately, represented another trade commodity, with captives from warfare sometimes sold to Roman merchants. These economic connections created interdependencies even between peoples frequently at war. Military culture permeated Suebian society. Young men trained from youth for combat, learning weapon skills, physical conditioning, and tactical cooperation. Warfare provided paths to glory, wealth through plunder and social advancement. Successful warriors gained reputation, followers, and potentially leadership positions. Their primary weapons included spears, swords, and shields. Spears served as versatile weapons suitable for both throwing and close combat. Swords, more expensive and difficult to produce, marked status while providing effective close-quarters weapons. Shields, typically wooden with metal reinforcement, offered protection while also serving as offensive weapons when used properly. Battle tactics emphasized shock and aggression. Suebian warriors charged with fierce determination, aiming to break enemy formations through psychological and physical impact. They shouted battle cries, beat weapons against shields creating intimidating noise, and fought with fierce determination. This approach proved effective against opponents who broke under pressure, but struggled against disciplined Roman formations that maintained cohesion. Raiding represented common military activity, perhaps more frequent than major battles. Small groups struck targets of opportunity, seeking livestock, captives, and portable wealth while avoiding serious resistance. These raids served economic purposes, supplementing agricultural production and social functions, allowing young warriors to prove themselves without the massive casualties of major warfare. Families formed society's core units. Extended family groups lived together or nearby, sharing resources and supporting one another. Kinship bonds created obligations, with relatives expected to assist each other, avenge wrongs, and maintain family honor. These connections provided security in uncertain times, knowing blood ties meant reliable allies. Marriage alliances united families, creating networks of mutual obligation. Betrothals might be arranged to cement political relationships or strengthen economic positions. Weddings involved elaborate ceremonies, gift exchanges, and celebrations that reinforced community bonds. Married women typically moved to husbands' communities, creating connections between different groups. Children represented family futures. They learned by observation and participation. Boys accompanying fathers to fields and training in weapons. Girls working alongside mothers in domestic tasks and learning household management. Education occurred through apprenticeship within family contexts, rather than formal schooling. Oral traditions, stories, songs, and wisdom passed from elders to youth, preserving cultural knowledge. Social hierarchies existed but remained somewhat fluid. Noble families enjoyed inherited status, controlling more resources and wielding greater influence. Free farmers formed a middle tier, independent households managing their own lands. Below them came various dependent categories, people attached to more powerful households in exchange for protection. Slavery existed as well, with war captives and debtors losing freedom, though treatment varied and paths to manumission existed. The Suebi demonstrated remarkable adaptability to different environments. In their Central European homeland, they managed dense forests, creating clearings for agriculture while utilizing woodland resources. They hunted forest game, gathered wild foods, and harvested timber for construction and fuel. When groups migrated to new territories, they adapted to different conditions. Suebi settling in Iberia encountered Mediterranean climates quite different from Germanic forests. They learned to cultivate new crops suited to local conditions, incorporated regional agricultural techniques, and adjusted lifestyles while maintaining core cultural identity. Water management proved important. Communities settled near streams and rivers, providing drinking water, irrigation potential, and fishing opportunities. Wetlands offered hunting grounds for waterfowl and aquatic resources. However, swamps and marshes also posed challenges, breeding diseases and creating difficult terrain. Successful communities learned to balance water access with health concerns. Seasonal cycles governed activities. Spring brought planting, summer required crop maintenance, autumn meant harvest and preparation for winter, while winter involved indoor activities, tool maintenance, and storytelling. This cyclical existence connected people intimately with natural rhythms, their survival dependent on reading environmental signs and timing activities appropriately. Suebian language belonged to the Germanic family, related to other ancient Germanic tongues. but distinctive enough for contemporary observers to note differences. Unfortunately, the Suebi left no written records in their own language, so reconstruction relies on place names, personal names recorded by Romans, and linguistic comparisons with related languages. Personal names often conveyed meanings related to warfare, nobility, or desired characteristics. Names like Ariovistus combined elements meaning specific things in Germanic languages. Place names in regions where Suebi settled sometimes preserve linguistic traces, though centuries of language change complicate interpretation. Oral tradition carried tremendous importance. Stories, genealogies, laws, and historical memories passed through generations via skilled speakers. Certain individuals specialized in memorizing and reciting these traditions, serving as living libraries. Poetry and song made information more memorable, with rhythmic patterns and formulaic phrases aiding recall. Runes represented the closest thing to native Germanic writing systems. These angular characters suited carving into wood or stone. Evidence suggests some Germanic peoples, possibly including Suebi, used runes for brief inscriptions, magical purposes, or marking ownership. However, extensive literacy remained rare until Christian missionaries introduced Latin alphabet and literacy traditions. The Suebi existed within a complex mosaic of peoples. To their north lived various Scandinavian and Baltic groups. Eastward dwelt other Germanic and eventually Slavic peoples. South and west lay Celtic territories, later absorbed by Rome. Understanding Suebian history requires recognizing these neighbors shaped their experiences through trade, conflict, and cultural exchange. Relations with Celtic peoples proved particularly significant during earlier periods. Celtic and Germanic cultures shared some features while differing in others. Interactions ranged from peaceful trade to violent conflict, with boundaries between Celtic and Germanic territories shifting over centuries. Eventually, Germanic expansion and Roman conquest drastically reduced Celtic domains. The arrival and expansion of Slavic peoples in Eastern Europe during late antiquity altered demographic landscapes. Some territories formerly associated with Suebian and other Germanic groups became predominantly Slavic. These transitions involved complex processes of migration, assimilation, and cultural transformation that historians and archaeologists continue studying. Within the Germanic world itself, relationships proved complex. Shared cultural roots didn't prevent conflicts. Different tribes competed for resources, prestige, and power. Alliances formed against common enemies, but dissolved when circumstances changed. This fluidity characterized Germanic political organization, lacking the centralized structures of Mediterranean empires. Roman writers provide most surviving written information about the Suebi, but their accounts require careful interpretation. Romans viewed Germanic peoples through cultural lenses shaped by Mediterranean urban civilization. They often depicted Germania as barbaric wilderness, its inhabitants as noble savages or dangerous threats depending on context and authorial purpose. Caesar's commentaries served political and propaganda functions alongside ethnographic description. His portrayal of Ariovistus and Suebian threat helped justify his Gallic campaigns to Roman audiences. The information contains valuable details but presents them within narratives serving Caesar's interests. Tacitus, writing later, provided more extensive ethnographic detail in his Germania. He described Germanic peoples partly to critique Roman society, using barbarian virtues as implicit criticism of Roman decadence. His account contains genuine observations but also stereotypes and idealization. Nevertheless, historians rely heavily on his work despite its limitations. Other Roman writers mention the Suebi in various contexts: military histories, geographical works, and administrative documents. Each source requires critical evaluation, considering author's perspective, information sources, and purposes for writing. Together, these scattered references provide framework for understanding Suebian history, supplemented by archaeology and other evidence. The dissolution of specifically Suebian identity occurred gradually through multiple processes. Political absorption by other kingdoms eliminated independent Suebian states. The Visigothic conquest of the Galician kingdom ended that manifestation of Suebian political power. Elsewhere, Suebian groups became components of larger political formations. Cultural assimilation progressed over generations. As Suebi adopted Christianity, Latin literacy, and Roman administrative practices, distinctiveness faded. Intermarriage with other populations blurred ethnic boundaries. Over time, identifying as specifically Suebian became less meaningful as other identities grew more salient. The emergence of new ethnic configurations during the medieval period created different frameworks for identity. Regional identities based on emerging kingdoms replaced older tribal affiliations. Religious identity as Christians united people across ethnic backgrounds. Feudal relationships created vertical loyalties cutting across horizontal ethnic ties, yet echoes persisted. Medieval chroniclers occasionally invoked Suebian heritage, connecting contemporary peoples to prestigious ancestors. Regional names preserved memory of ancient populations. Cultural practices and legal traditions maintained continuities with earlier periods, even as explicit Suebian identity disappeared. Today, the Suebi live primarily in historical memory and archaeological records. Scholars study their history as part of broader investigations into migration period Europe and Germanic peoples' roles in transforming the Roman world. Academic debates continue regarding interpretations of evidence and significance of various developments. Regional museums in areas historically associated with Suebi display artifacts, reconstructions, and educational materials about these ancient peoples. Enthusiasts participate in historical reenactment, attempting to recreate aspects of Suebian life based on available evidence. These activities help make distant past tangible for contemporary audiences. The Suebian story resonates because it exemplifies broader human patterns: migration, adaptation, cultural preservation and change, the rise and fall of peoples and kingdoms. Their experiences remind us that modern ethnic and national configurations rest on complex histories of mixture, movement, and transformation, extending back through countless generations. As we conclude this journey through Suebian history, let their story accompany you into rest. These ancient peoples who walked forests and fields long centuries ago lived lives of struggle and achievement, raising families, fighting battles, celebrating victories and mourning losses. They left descendants who contributed to the diverse European populations of today. Their memory, preserved in fragments and echoes, connects us to deep human past. May this tale of the Suebi bring you peaceful rest, your mind wandering through ancient landscapes, imagining lives so different yet fundamentally connected to our own. Sleep well, knowing the past lives within us, shaping who we are even as we create new futures. Good night.